Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining and for tuning in via live stream. If that's how you're participating, we're so glad you could be here today. My name is Lamisa Mustafa. I use she, her, hers pronouns. And I am grateful to our audience for being here for what I, in no uncertain terms, call a once in a lifetime opportunity to hear from a living treasure. So we're super excited in case you couldn't tell. Before we introduce ourselves and our special guest, I just wanted to share some information about how the Zoom webinar is working because we want as many people to engage with our discussion as possible. We are live streaming to YouTube. So if you have folks who you think would want to participate, feel free to send them over to our SMU Human Rights YouTube page. Our moderator tonight will be asking pre-selected questions from our SMU Human Rights community. And throughout the event, different SMU Human Rights students will also be asking questions. We recommend putting your view mode on speaker view so that you can see our speaker and whoever is asking a question. So since we have a large audience of people with varying familiarity with SMU Human Rights, I just wanted to give a brief introduction of who we are. So out of the more than 5,000 higher education institutions in the United States, SMU Human Rights is one of only 7 programs to offer an undergraduate degree in human rights. You heard that right, only 7 out of more than 5,000. And we're the only one in the South. But apart from those sheer, numbers and statistics, there are a lot of other things that make us unique too. And that includes our interdisciplinary curriculum, the fact that our students are studying a wide variety of things. They're double majoring, triple majoring, double minoring, triple minoring. We also offer trips around the world, different community engagement opportunities like this webinar, leadership development, programming, and also social innovation opportunities for students to build their own projects from scratch. And obviously, while we're an academic degree granting program, we're also a family that is committed to supporting each other and also challenging each other to be and do better. So I serve as the administrative director of the Human Rights Council, which is the student board of the program. And our mission is advancing human rights advocacy on SMU campus. And we do that through things like this webinar, through partnerships with different student organizations on campus and different organizations off campus too. And I'm really proud to say that this event tonight was conceived of and almost entirely organized by students on the Human Rights Council. So along with the program, we really demonstrate how important it is to support students in their work and provide platforms to highlight all that we're doing. So with that, I want to invite Erica Zamora, who is the director of the Office of Social Change and Intercultural Engagement, to give a brief intro.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Like Lamisa said, my name is Erica Zamora. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the director in the Office of Social Change and Intercultural Engagement, which is just a whole bunch of words to a lot of you. The Office of Social Change and Intercultural Engagement at SMU exists within the Student Affairs Division, and our priority is really supporting our students through their time at SMU, no matter what that journey might look like. And specifically, encouraging our students to find their voice through advocacy, through giving back, through understanding what it means to be an engaged citizen and to take action for things that they're passionate about. We help advise organizations on campus, from our culturally based student organizations to our community engagement based student organizations. And we are thrilled and so excited and grateful to the Human Rights Program today for partnering with us for, like Lamisa said, a really mostly student organized event. We love to empower our students to use their voices, to explore different topics, to really figure out what are the things that are close to their hearts and the things that they feel really passionately about. So we are so excited to continue to support our students' good work, and we really give a big round of applause to the Human Rights Council. And so with that, I hope you all have a great time this afternoon, and we look forward to seeing some of you soon.
Thanks so much, Erica. And we're obviously so grateful to your office for your collaboration and making this possible through your sponsorship. And we also wanted to thank SMU Student Senate as they are another one of our sponsoring organizations tonight. We're grateful to them for helping the Human Rights Council and student organizations across campus to bring programming like this to our community. And lastly, we just wanted to give a shout out to our publicity partners. So thank you to the Feminist Equality Movement, the Student Senate Diversity and Inclusion Committee, Amnesty International at SMU, and the Association of Black Students. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, the Vice Administrative Director of the Human Rights Council, and my dear friend, Bethany Bass.
Thank you so much, Lamisa. My name is Bethany Bass, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I'm also a student leader on the Human Rights Council. And before we begin our moderated conversation, I wanted to formally introduce our guest speaker. Through her activism and scholarship over the decades, Dr. Angela Davis has been deeply involved in our nation's quest for social justice. Her work as an educator, both at the university level and in the public sphere, has always emphasized the importance of building communities of struggle for economic, racial, and gender justice. Dr. Davis has spent the last 15 years at the University of California, Santa Cruz, where she is now a distinguished professor emerita of history of consciousness, an interdisciplinary PhD program, and of feminist studies. She is the author of 9 books and has lectured throughout the United States, as well as in Europe, Asia, Australia, Africa, and South America. In recent years, a persistent theme of her work has been the range of social problems associated with incarceration and generalized criminalization of those communities that are the most affected by poverty and racial discrimination. She draws upon her own experiences in the early 70s as a person who spent 18 months in jail and on trial. Dr. Davis has conducted extensive research on numerous issues related to race, gender, and imprisonment. Having helped popularize the notion of the prison industrial complex, she now urges her audiences to forge a 21st century conversation around abolition. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Angela Davis.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
We want to make sure that we utilize the most of your time, and so I'll get right into the questions. Many people have pointed to this summer's Black Lives Matter protests and societal changes that have come from them as a fruition of your own work. Can you speak to us about the momentum we have seen in the movement for Black lives and how it connects to the work you have been doing for decades in regards to carceral systems and beyond?
Okay, thank you for that first question, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this program. I'm totally impressed by the Human Rights Program and the Human Rights Council. So I'm really happy to be here this afternoon. And to begin to answer that question, I would say I may be one of the people whose names are familiar, but there's so many others who have worked around the demand for prison and police abolition for many, many years. And I also really should point out that it was people in prison who first raised the public call for abolition in the early 70s. And I don't want us to underestimate the intellectual and activist contributions that people inside have made. This was a pivotal issue during the 1971 Attica Prisoners' Rebellion. And we can't fail to recognize that even though people have been locked away, oftentimes given death sentences, and I'm not talking about capital punishment, I'm talking about the fact that many people have received life sentences. And I was talking about someone the other day who received a sentence of 777 years as an 18-year-old for being in an automobile from which someone fired a gun. So I just want to use this opportunity to remind us that we can't assume that these ideas are sui generis, that they just emerge by themselves. And they can't just be attached to figures whose names are known. This moment, I think, is the fruition of work that has been unfolding for decades. And I'll just say that many of us never imagined that we would experience a moment like this. We were working for the future. And we assume that that future might not begin to materialize for many, many decades, and that we would probably not be around to witness it. And so we are so fortunate to see that, finally, the notion of racism is beginning to shift, that it's no longer primarily attached to individual attitudes, but rather to structures and systems. And so I see a continuum. It connects in a way that the struggle for Black liberation has always connected to those who fought against slavery, those who fought during radical Reconstruction, who founded the NAACP and other organizations at the beginning of the last decade, women like Ida B. Wells, who created the anti-lynching movement. So I could continue for the rest of the hour talking about that. Yeah, I just really want to emphasize the intellectual contributions of people in prison.
Thank you for that important reminder. And I know that all of us would love to hear you continue to talk about that, Dr. Davis. But I want to get to the questions too that people have laid out as well. As a Black queer woman, my identities shape my activism. And what ways do your own identities shape your activism? And what are your thoughts around the debate surrounding identity politics?
Well, that's a complicated question because my own activism actually predates the rise of what is called identity politics. And of course, it is absolutely necessary to listen to and take leadership from those who have what we call lived experience of racism, misogyny, homophobia, class exploitation, ableism, transphobia. But I also want to emphasize the point that being involved in these struggles does not require an identity relation. For example, I've always passionately supported the struggles of the working class from the time I was a teenager. And because I believe that the capitalist system, which is the source of so many of the problematic issues we are confronting today. Capitalism is racial capitalism. Capitalism is the source of all of these structural and systemic forms of racism. And for that reason, I've always supported the working class, even though I myself might not be a member of the working class. I've supported trans issues, and as all of us have. And so I guess I would say when I speak out against racism, misogyny, homophobia, it is not primarily on the grounds of identity. It is more on the grounds of politics and morality. And I say this because I want to make the point that white people cannot be excused for not having fought against racism because they are not its direct targets. And men cannot be excused from not being on the front line of struggles against gender violence because men are not the most usual targets. But at the same time, those who have lived experience have important knowledge and can give important leadership to us all.
Thank you for that. And thank you, Bethany, for moderating. So as we mentioned at the beginning, we are going to feature some different human rights students who will ask Dr. Davis some questions related to their own work. So first, I wanted to invite Alex.
Hi, Dr. Davis. My name is Alex Fastnight, and my pronouns are she, hers, hers. And I'm a second-year student majoring in international studies and public policy with minors in human rights, history, and Spanish. I currently serve as a pre-major senator and a member of the Diversity and Inclusion Caucus and Student Senate. Last semester, I founded SMU Unsung Heroes, a student organization dedicated to honoring the often underappreciated staff members on campus. This summer, I started a GoFundMe and raised over $15,000 to purchase gift cards for all 151 furloughed dining hall staff members. We are currently working on distributing these gift cards and plan on having an awareness campaign to share the experiences of these dining hall staff members. Since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, virtual learning has obviously been at the forefront of decisions for higher education. But these decisions have often left out the staff members who make sure that our university can continue to function and that our community is supported. It is important to recognize that the challenges facing SMU dining hall staff members are just one example within a nationwide conversation about the financial crisis caused by COVID-19. While many are quick to call for reopening businesses, many also forget that the so-called essential workers, whose lives are on the line in the process. Can you speak to us about the exacerbated marginalization of the working class during this pandemic?
Well, thank you so much for that question. During this period of the pandemic, we've experienced numerous insights about the way in which our worlds are organized. As a matter of fact, the fact that racism is structural and systematic came from the recognition that COVID-19 was affecting Black and Latinx and especially Indigenous communities in a disproportionate way. And largely because so many people of color are what we now call essential workers. They are the ones who do not have the luxury of sheltering in place. They go out and they are exposed every day to the virus. And I think that what you call the exacerbated marginalization of the working class should help us to understand that we're talking about people without whom our worlds would not exist. People who are often invisibilized, they're relegated to the margins. And it's so interesting that on our college and university campuses, people often evoke the academic community. And they're thinking primarily about the students and the professors. But they forget about the staff. They forget about the janitorial staff without whom we could not do that work. So, you know, even though this is a very stressful period because of the ways in which the current occupant, and don't let me start talking about him, please, because I might not stop. But precisely because of the fact that so many people are dying as a result of the exposure to the virus because they do the essential work. That ought to tell us something about the people whom we should support under all conditions, not only under conditions of the current pandemic. And I just want to tell you in this context that there are some pretty radical unions across the country. And here I'm in California, in Oakland, California, Ohlone, unceded Ohlone territory. And we have a number of really radical unions. For example, the International Longshore Workers Union. On June 19th, on Juneteenth, they shut down all the ports in the state of California in order to protest racism. And I think that all of us, whatever we do, should always pursue alliances and connections with working class people. They're in the forefront of the struggle against capitalism, and that is our future.
Thank you so much, Dr. Davis.
Thanks, Alex. Next, I'm going to call on Abina to ask a question.
Hello, Dr. Davis. Thank you once again for being here. My name is Abina Marfo, and I use the pronouns she, her, hers. I am a current junior double majoring in sociology and health and society with a minor in human rights. And I'm the current president of African Students Association, and our goal is to foster a community interested in the education and promotion of African cultures. So white supremacist structures separate African people and African American people's collaboration in fighting against systematic racism and oppression impacting their communities. So while every Black person experience is different, it's important to realize that being Black is an identity that is marginalized and persecuted on a global scale. So at SMU, the African Students Association and the Association of Black Students are in constant dialogue with one another about the issues that impact our communities. And recently, Black students presented demands to SMU administration to institute changes so that Black students can thrive in their college experience. So while the Association of Black Students could have solely controlled this effort to demand institutional changes, that was not the case. Black student leaders, including African Students Association executive members, were active partners in the student activism. Another recent example of collaboration was when the Association of Black Students and other Black organizations on campus shared awareness materials that the African Student Association made in regards to the End SARS movement. So my question is, there are many critiques of public figures who spoke up in support of the End SARS movement in Nigeria and those who did not. Can you speak to us about the injustice happening in Nigeria and more broadly about what we should consider when engaging in activism for Black people globally?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the question. Again, this is a pivotal issue. Our struggles against state violence are not confined to the US. They're global. And struggles against racism are global. Even in African countries, well, take South Africa, for example. Many of us assume that now that the system of apartheid has been dismantled, there's no more racism in South Africa. And however, if one looks at the way in which the police structure continues to embody the methodologies and approaches of the apartheid era, then one sees that it's not so much about the individual, the racial identity of the individual person, because in South Africa, all of the police are Black. But at the same time, they are functioning in accordance with the same kind of systemic racism as they did during the apartheid era. And thank you so much for raising the movement in Nigeria. The policing follows global trainings and global mandates. And what is happening in Nigeria, the use of a police squad that is supposedly supposed to deal with, robbery and so forth, in order to mete out repression, tells us something about the way in which the police have always been structured. And I think that if one reads, for example, Alex Vitale's The End of Policing, one gets a sense of the way in which it is interwoven into struggles against colonialism, struggles against slavery, struggles against racism. The police have always responded in a repressive way. And that ought to encourage us to think about new forms of guaranteeing safety and security. Armed police engage in violence, whether we're talking about Nigeria or whether we're talking about Philadelphia and the recent killing of Walter Wallace, who was a man in pain, who was suffering a crisis, a mental health crisis, and he needed someone to help him. And as a consequence, he was killed. So thank you so much, Abena, for allowing us to acknowledge the global context. And we're talking about Europe. Struggles are unfolding in France, in the UK. We're talking about South America. Brazil has the largest number of Black people outside of the continent of Africa, and the worst forms of militarized police, and more people there are victims of racist police violence than perhaps anywhere else in the world. So thank you so much for raising the importance of creating a global perspective.
Thank you for your response.
Our next student's question continues this global theme. So I wanted to invite Zainab to ask a question.
Hi, Dr. Davis. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts with our community today. My name is Zainab Noshahi. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm majoring in human rights and advertising, and I'm a member of Students for Justice in Palestine here at SMU. I've participated in different conferences around Palestinian liberation, where I've connected with students and community organizers to learn more about Palestine and various organizing strategies. And I'm hoping to partner more with students here to bring awareness and advocacy to the Palestinian struggle at SMU. We're currently in the beginning stages of building coalitions with other student organizations to bring consciousness around global liberation issues and around the issue of Palestine specifically. And in this work, we've come across an obstacle of mobilizing other students to advocate for Palestine, because the question of Palestine remains an incredibly divisive and controversial issue. And you yourself have faced a great deal of criticism and backlash regarding your work on Palestine. Could you help us understand why this is the case? Why do you see this issue as so important in the realm of global human rights? And what are some concrete steps we can take to increase understanding and justice for Palestine?
Well, thank you. Thank you for that really important question, Zainab. I can't overestimate the importance of Palestine. I'm someone who first became active around justice for Palestine when I was in college myself. So practically the entirety of my political career has involved speaking out against the occupation of Palestine. And let me say that when we think about structural systemic racism in this country, we link it to colonization, the genocidal assault on Native people, and we link it to slavery. And I think it's so important to recognize that the US is a settler colonial state. And if we want to look at settler colonialism elsewhere in the world, Israel is not only a settler colonial state, but it's one that is trying to continue to expand. And so if we are wanting to struggle for a global democratic future, we certainly have to be concerned about what is happening in occupied Palestine. Yeah, I've been criticized, and I've expected that criticism. But what I can say is that precisely because of the fact that over the last decade or so, so many more people have joined the struggle. The power of those who have Zionist positions is weakening. We're able to do so much more than used to be possible around the issue of Palestine. It used to be that we had all of our social justice movements, and then over here was the question of Palestine. And some of us, some years ago, I would say maybe a little over 10 years ago, decided that what we had to do was to guarantee that the question of Palestine was integrally involved in our quest for social justice. And while we haven't always been entirely successful, we have experienced successes. And let me say that it's so important for us to celebrate our victories, even if they're small ones, because they tell us that the work we do does indeed make a difference. And finally, I would just point out that we would not be where we are today at this conjuncture, where we're reflecting on the role that racism has played throughout the history of this country, had not it been for Palestinian solidarity. And I always like to point out that when the Ferguson protest happened in 2014, it was on the ground resistors in Palestine who were the first to offer solidarity and who led the way for a wave of global solidarity around the world. And so it's our responsibility in this country to support our comrades and our sisters and brothers in occupied Palestine. And that is not only for the sake of justice and freedom for Palestine, but for the sake of justice and freedom in the entire world.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Zainab. And thank you, Dr. Davis. Next, I wanted to call on Aiden to talk to us a little bit more about the carceral system.
Hello, Dr. Davis. Thank you so much for sharing this virtual space with us today. Well, my name is Aiden Ellis. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a second-year student at SMU pursuing majors in film and English with minors in human rights and art history. Outside of the classroom, I'm proud to serve as the president of the SMU chapter and as a student activist coordinator for the state of Texas for Amnesty International USA. Through this work, I educate and organize people around the country to prevent individual executions and to ultimately work towards abolishing the death penalty. One of the key death penalty cases that student leaders within Amnesty work towards is the case of Rodney Reed, a Black man from Bastrop, Texas, who was convicted for the abduction, rape, and murder of a white woman named Stacey Stites in 1997, and he has been on Texas death row ever since. Due to the significant reasonable doubt in the case and the lack of thorough investigation, organizations, including Amnesty International, as well as the Reed Justice Initiative, have pushed Governor Greg Abbott and the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals to grant a stay in his execution by lethal injection, which was originally scheduled for November 20th, 2019. Ultimately, the stay was granted, and Mr. Reed no longer has an execution date, but he still awaits on death row. This past summer, I co-organized an awareness program featuring Roderick Reed, who spoke about the continued fight to bring his brother home. This case is just one of many that illustrates the inextricable link between racism and the death penalty. The winning presidential vice presidential ticket in this election ran on a campaign that promised to eliminate the death penalty at the federal level. What are your thoughts on this, and how can this policy change move us closer to addressing injustices within the carceral system?
Well, thank you so much for your work with Amnesty International, and specifically your work to abolish the death penalty. And let me say that the call to abolish the death penalty is very much linked to the call to abolish imprisonment as the dominant mode of punishment, and to abolish police and reconceptualize what it means to be safe and secure in the society. The US is the only country in the industrialized world that still uses the death penalty as a matter of routine. So it should not even be a question of whether someone is guilty or innocent. No state should have the right to take life in that way. And if one wonders, why does the US still use the death penalty when virtually every other country, every other industrialized democracy has already abolished it? And my answer has always been that the existence of capital punishment today is very much related to practices during slavery. As a matter of fact, in the event that people aren't aware of this, there were calls to abolish the death penalty around the time of the American Revolution. So we're talking about 1776. And as a matter of fact, what's interesting is that the invention of the prison was supposed to be an alternative to corporal punishment, to capital punishment and corporal punishment. But when the death penalty was pretty much abolished, it was gotten rid of for all except a couple of offenses like murder and in some instances rape. That did not happen for slaves. So white people benefited from the overturning of of capital punishment, but Black people continued to be subject to death by the state. And as a matter of fact, Frederick Douglass points out in one of his speeches that in, I think it was the state of Virginia, there was only one offense for which white people received the death penalty, and that was murder. But there were 70 some odd offenses for which Black people, enslaved people, received the death penalty. So I'm saying this because it's important now that we are reflecting on the impact of history on the way in which racism is embedded in so many institutions. It's important to point out that capital punishment is a racist institution, not only because people of color are the most frequent recipients of the death penalty, but because of its racist history, because of the structural racism that is embedded in the death penalty. And so my answer would be that abolitionist struggles reside on a continuum. And that, yes, we need to completely abolish the death penalty. But at the same time, we should recognize that there are other death penalties. As I pointed out before, many people are sentenced to die in prison, and that's a death penalty. So let us see these interconnections. And yes, I hope the death penalty is abolished at the federal level. And as a result of the new president and vice president-elect. But we can't stop with that. It has to be fully abolished, and we can't simply stop with abolishing capital punishment. We have to abolish all forms of injustice that permeate the carceral system.
Thank you so much for your response.
Thank you so much for responding to that as well. I think that we've all learned some really important things from this discussion. Talking about the electoral politics, moving back to that theme, the most consequential election in many of our lives just took place 2 weeks ago. What are your thoughts about organizing beyond and outside of electoral politics, and how do we carry the momentum of record voter turnouts into other aspects of social justice work?
Can you believe the election was just over 2 weeks ago? It seems like it's been a lifetime since the current occupant has refused to acknowledge the results of the election. And I think that, well, first of all, let me say that there are aspects of the election that we applaud. Fascism, which was threatening to engulf us all, has for the moment been abated. But when we learn how many white people voted for this person, I felt extremely sad because I thought that we had moved further than that. But then I saw that more Black men voted this time for the occupant. So anyway, that means we have a lot of work to do, an enormous amount of work to do. But again, I would like to point out that electoral politics don't exist in a vacuum. And as a matter of fact, most of the monumental changes that have taken place in our history have happened not because somebody has been elected, but rather because of movements, because of ordinary people, because people have come together and have cultivated a collective imagination of what the future can be. And certainly, all of those who worked on the election this time were people influenced by and were people who were a part of that larger movement, not just around electoral politics, but around changing the world. And so I think that that our job now is to continue that organizing and that mobilizing. Let me just say that we made a major mistake when Obama was elected in 2008. People assumed that all that was necessary was to get the best candidate into office, and then we would be safe. We did not mobilize and organize and demonstrate and protest and strike and do all of the things we should have done during the 8 years that Obama was president. Had we done that, we might not be facing this untenable predicament today. And so what I say is that we have to continue. Our mobilizations have to become even larger. We have to guarantee that the work of demonstrating that we want a future from which racism has been eliminated, racism and heteropatriarchy and all of the other forms of oppression that have such a fatal impact on people's lives.
Thank you for that, Bethany and Dr. Davis. Now we're going to move into our last two student questions for our event, and then Bethany will be asking some more moderator questions. So our next student, Bree, she's unable to participate live because she and her women's basketball team are working toward a championship, and we're rooting for them. But Erica, do you mind sharing the recording of Bree asking her question for Dr. Davis? Now we're gonna figure out some screen share. There we go.
My name is Bree Tolley, and my pronouns are she, her. I identify as a bisexual woman. I am a junior, majoring in political science with a minor in human rights. I am also a member of the SMU women's basketball team. These past few months, I have been involved with activism for BLM and LGBTQ+ rights. I've also co-founded an organization with Ashton Woods called the Black Student Athlete Community, or BSAC for short. The group is meant to promote community and cultural awareness within the SMU Athletic Department while providing a safe space for Black student athletes to create and develop their self-identity. We are more than just athletes and should not be subscribed to certain rhetoric like shut up and dribble and stick to sports. Many people do not realize the significant role that sports have played in activism, especially during the time of the Civil Rights Movement. The reason Ashton and I started BSAC is because majority of student athletes are Black and make up majority of all Black students at SMU. Black student athletes needed their own designated campus group as a point of contact because it gives more weight to help amplify our voices. Strength comes in numbers. So far, this group has put together a campus protest for the BLM movement and a campus demonstration after the verdict of Breonna Taylor's case was announced. We have also crafted a list of demands for the veterans supporting for Black student athletes that has now been recognized and responded to by President Turner and our athletic director, Rick Hart, thanks to the help of the Black Unity Forum. Our group is in the process of becoming an official student organization. I am so proud of what we have accomplished in just a matter of 3 months. The NFL's treatment of Colin Kaepernick demonstrates both large-scale impact and high stakes of Black athletes' social justice efforts. Dr. Davis, I would love to hear your thoughts about the unique challenges that Black athletes face in their activism and how they can overcome those challenges. For example, the NBA players who refused to play the following police shooting of Jacob Blake, and the WNBA players who have also spoken out against the owner of the Atlanta Dream and Georgia Senator, Kelly Loeffler. And last thoughts, Dr. Davis, you are the reason that I went natural.
Oh, what a wonderful question. Thank you so much, Bree. I know you're at your basketball practice now, but thank you so much for recording that question. Yeah, you're right that athletes have always been involved in social justice struggles. Who do we think about during the period of campaigns against the war in Vietnam? It's Muhammad Ali, who was the most outspoken person in challenging the US invasion of Vietnam. Tommie Smith during the Olympics in 1970, when was it? 1975 Olympics, I think, or maybe it was a decade earlier. But anyway,
sorry, I can't help you there. I'm sorry.
I got it. 1968. It was the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City when Tommie Smith and John Carlos, when they were medalers. Tommie Smith won the race, and on the winners platform, they raised their fist as a sign of solidarity with the struggles that were unfolding in the 1960s. And so we shouldn't be surprised that athletes are speaking out. And Colin Kaepernick is amazing. I just have so much love and gratitude and admiration for him. I just saw a statement that he did calling for freedom for Mumia Abu Jamal. And because the police all over the country have relentlessly campaigned against Mumia, so few people have been willing, so few people in those kinds of prominent positions have been willing to take a position because, I guess, because they're afraid of the police. But Colin, he risked all. He gave up his career because something more important was at stake. And I thank you so much for drawing attention to the fact that WNBA players, as a matter of fact, during the initial Black Lives Matter campaign, I'm talking about in the aftermath of 2014, it was the WNBA who were the first to bring that to their audiences. And you specifically mention the Atlanta Dream and the current race, which, by the way, the elections aren't over yet. Because all of us, regardless of whether we're from Georgia or not, have to participate in the effort to guarantee that progressive senators are elected in Georgia. And the fact that the WNBA players there, the Atlanta Dream, stood up against the owner, Kelly Loeffler, and supported Reverend Warnock, her opponent, is so inspiring to me. So I'm just remembering the fact that at the University of Missouri, you remember when was that? That was maybe about 2015. Some of you may have been a little bit too young to remember that. Yeah, university, college and university generations are only like 4 or 5 years. But they were engaged in this important struggle on the campus, which became as widespread as it did become when the football players joined and they called for the resignation of the chancellor. When the athletes called for the resignation of the president or the chancellor, whoever it was, everyone else followed. And the leadership of the university did resign. So yeah, athletes are very powerful. And let's not underestimate the role of other aspects of our culture, music, musicians, filmmakers, cultural workers play an important role in helping to bring people to consciousness and allowing people to learn how to feel in different ways.
I'm sure Bree is going to be very excited to hear that answer. And last but certainly not least, I wanted to call on Shara to ask our last student question.
Hi, Dr. Davis. I can't thank you enough for being here today. My name is Shara Jaraja, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a music and human rights major and also president scholar. Through my SMU Human Rights Fellowship, I'm developing a podcast examining the history of SMU through a human rights lens or racial justice lens. This summer has made it clear that we can't move forward without identifying the racism that characterized our past and continues to affect our present. For more context, SMU is a predominantly white institution located in Highland Park, a former sundown town that remains one of the richest and whitest cities in America. I've spent a lot of time exploring how white supremacy is integral to the fabric of my school, from admissions practices to the authors on our syllabi. These exclusionary practices are not isolated issues. They are foundational to predominantly white institutions. Your teaching career spans across a wide range of colleges and universities of varying institutional legacies. Taking your experiences into account, I would love to hear your perspective on the role of predominantly white institutions. Can PWIs serve a positive function distinct from the Eurocentrism, racism, and elitism that characterizes their origins?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're right. I've been involved in predominantly white educational institutions as a student, as a professor. So I have to answer that question in the affirmative, but I'm not saying that the institutions themselves take the initiative to resist and challenge the racism and the heteropatriarchal structures that are so integral a part of the way the university itself is organized. But I do think that students, I think that staff, we were talking about the fact that the university community goes beyond the students and the professors. It involves staff, it involves workers, that it is possible to forge traditions of resistance and struggle. And I want to emphasize the importance of education, the importance of intellectual work. And when I say intellectual work, I'm not only referring to intellectual work that happens on the campuses. One of the things I try to teach my university students is that knowledge gets produced in many places, and we have to be respectful of the knowledge that gets produced in the community, in the course of struggle, the knowledge that gets produced in prison. I was emphasizing the fact that so much important knowledge is produced behind bars. And let me just take this opportunity to encourage you to try to look at a film that is called Since I've Been Down. The filmmaker is Gilder Shepard, who teaches at Evergreen College in Tacoma. And this is an incredible film about the process of education behind bars, about the fact that these young men and women who were arrested when they were teenagers found themselves in a situation where they were sentenced to so many years that education was denied to them. And therefore they created the process themselves. They created an organization called Teach. They learn how to conceptualize curricula. They learn how to teach, and there's this remarkable moment in the film where one of the men in prison says, when I teach, I almost feel free. And you get to see the serious intellectual labor that is more impressive than what I've seen among professors. So in encouraging this kind of approach, faculty and students should challenge their professors if the professor is not willing to engage in a serious intellectual conversation about the structural nature of racism. So I think that the contributions will come from students. The contributions will come from progressive and radical faculty. The contributions will come from other members of the community.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Davis.
Thank you so much for that response, and piggybacking off of what you just talked about, how a great amount of learning comes from prisons. How has your own prison experience influenced your understanding of the carceral system and its connections to other aspects of society?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it was really pivotal. And let me tell you why. When I was arrested in 1970, it was in connection with work that I was doing to support people in prison, to free political prisoners. And I had been doing this work for some time. But we had a tendency to imagine prisoners is primarily male. And so when I myself was arrested, I witnessed a whole new set of issues about which we had not been cognizant. And so I realized that prisons are gendered, and there are ways in which the experiences of women in prison are not only important, but shed light on the whole system. And let me just give you one example of that. The connection between intimate or individual violence and state violence. Many women who are in prison have suffered sexual abuse and other forms of intimate violence. And so what they have said to us is that the violence they feel in prison is really no different from the violence from an intimate partner in terms of the way it feels. And as a result of that insight, feminist studies scholars and others who work in the field, organic intellectuals who haven't necessarily gone to college, have developed a whole analysis of the connection between state violence and individual or intimate violence, so that we can speak of the ways in which the military, the police, the violence of the state helps to encourage violence as an individual practice, and that men and others who engage in violence against their partners are actually doing the work of the state. And so that's an insight that would not have happened had we not taken women's experiences seriously. And I began to do that when I was in jail. As a matter of fact, it took me a while because I had to reflect upon that experience. And finally, I was teaching at San Francisco State University, and I said, I think I want to teach a course on incarcerated women. And I think I want to teach the students at San Francisco State, but I also want them to go inside of an institution so that they can be taught by those who have lived experience of incarceration. And I actually did that. And it's interesting because some of the students thought that when they were going to the jail, San Francisco County Jail, that they were going to offer all of their talents to these, poor prisoners who had not had access to education and so forth. And so on the first day of class, I told them that they were about to be taught by the women who were there in jail. And it kind of blew their minds, and they couldn't believe that those women had so much intelligence and were so articulate. And that's what we see whenever we go behind bars. But thanks for that question.
Well, thank you for answering it. Shifting gears just a little bit, one of the central considerations in the practice of human rights is that of operating inside the system or outside of it. Can you speak to us about where you identify your own work and whether it is even possible to advance social justice without operating in both places?
Well, one answer would be no, both inside and outside. That's always necessary. But another answer would trouble that binary, would ask, whether we can ever really and truly get outside of the system. And I think that, capitalism is a system that colonizes even our emotions, and the fact that we're all where we are by virtue of the impact of capitalism. You know, our clothes, our objects, our houses, our dreams. But at the same time, we have to learn how to be critical. We have to, even if we are always inside, we can learn how to subvert it. And I think that's what we're always doing. Now, of course, there are those who are more or less subject to institutionalized practices and rules and regulations and places and institutions like the university, corporations, schools, etc. And then there are those of us who do community activism. But those are relative positionalities. We're always inside. And I think that wherever we are, I make this point because some people feel that they can't do social justice work where they are. They feel that they have to get outside of their particular location, whether it's their job or whether it's their school. Students often feel as if they have to drop out of school in order to do really important work. And my position is always that you create arenas of struggle wherever you find yourself. If you are a musician, you create the arena of struggle within the music community, regardless of its connections to global capitalism. If you are a student, you work to change the place where you are studying while you are there, and you work to create legacies so that new generations of students will carry that on. And of course, we could continue and look at all of the specific locations or positionalities. But I think we create arenas of struggle wherever we happen to find ourselves.
Thank you for that response. That is definitely something to ponder and think more about, questioning that binary. I'm so grateful to have learned from you and learned today. You've spoken about often handing the baton to the next generation. And we have an intergenerational audience tonight. Can you speak to them, young and elderly, about the importance of training and supporting young people?
Our struggles are always multi-generational struggles. The young, the not so young, the old. And I guess I would say that it's the young people who really carry the baton, which is the metaphor that you use. It's the young people who are out front, who are clearing the way for new paths towards justice and equality. It's the young people who can take ideas that have developed over time and with great difficulty and use them as the foundation for launching themselves into new worlds. And so when I was a young person, I really believed that. And I had wonderful relationships with older people. And the older people I appreciated most were the ones who not only helped me to learn about struggles of the past, who not only shared their wisdom, but also took those of us who were young seriously and did not assume that we had to do it exactly the way they had done it in the past. This is how change happens from one generation to the next. And those older people who insist that young people keep on doing the same thing, that's not helpful. as a matter of fact, that militates against the kinds of developments progressive developments that we see on the continuum of struggle. So I would urge young people to be respectful and learn from older generations, but do not feel as if you have to replicate their work. Know that you can do it differently. And older people should respect that and learn how to follow the youth as they blaze new paths. One very compelling example of this is the very patronizing way in which Black Lives Matter activists have been approached by veterans of the civil rights movement. They've been asked, well, where are your leaders? Where is your manifesto? Who is your leader? As a matter of fact, expecting to see a Black male charismatic figure who follows in the tradition of Du Bois and Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. And so, we can go on and on. But they said, following Ella Baker, because Ella Baker, who was a contemporary of Martin Luther King and worked in the civil rights movement, challenged the notion that leadership had to be individualistic, that it had to be charismatic, that it had to be male. And so she talked about the leadership that one could find among the rank and file of the struggle, and that the ranks of the struggle were full of leaders, and that we could develop a collective approach, a different paradigm of leadership, collective leadership. And that's a feminist approach. And I'm so thankful to the young women who founded Black Lives Matter, who emphasized that new feminist collective mode of leadership. But that's how I would begin to ask the question. We could answer the question, rather. We could have many, many more conversations about this issue, because this is how movements remain living and vital. And let me just say one final thing, which I'd like to emphasize. The reason we have a Black liberation struggle today, which is really about justice for everyone. It's not only about Black people, but that struggle that goes back hundreds of years is precisely because each generation implants an impulse in the next generation to struggle for freedom. And it's really remarkable that all over this hemisphere, Black people have been struggling since slavery. And therefore, the struggle for Black freedom is the struggle for democracy, for everyone. And of course, we can't forget that the Black movement would never have been able to develop as it did without the assistance of Indigenous people. The first peoples of this land were the first to act in solidarity with the first African people who were brought to this country.
Thank you for that, and thank you for these important reminders and gems from tonight's discussion. As our last moderated question, we cannot ignore the fact that the revolution definitely takes a serious toll, especially on people in visible leadership like yourself. So can you tell us about something that brings you joy and a sense of possibility now, even with everything that is going on?
Well, actually there are a lot of things. And I've learned a great deal, of course, over the many decades during which I have been alive. I've learned that community is most important, that courage comes not so much from an individual source, but rather from connecting with others, creating a community. I've also learned that even when we think that the work we're doing doesn't matter, that no one is paying attention, that ultimately it can make a difference. As I said earlier in the conversation, I never expected to witness a moment like this. I could only imagine that generations into the future, people would be engaging in different kinds of struggles which were built on the foundation of the struggles that we have undertaken. But I never expected to hear people talking about abolition in mainstream discourse, abolition of the police, abolition of prisons. I never expected that. So for one thing, I'm really happy, even amidst all of the pain and suffering that we're witnessing. I'm so glad that I lived long enough to be able to witness this moment, and to witness it not just for myself, but for all of my comrades and sisters and brothers who are no longer with us, who did the work that brought us this far. And so, you know, when I see young people doing this work, it makes me happy. It gives me hope. It makes me feel joyful. When I listen to the fact that when I listen to musicians who've been influenced by these waves of struggle for social justice, I feel possibility. And I think art has always offered us a glimpse of possibilities that we cannot necessarily generate using the tools of logical analysis and the work that we as scholars do. Cultural workers, musicians, filmmakers, give us the tools with which we can create hope for the future and create possibility. And this is a moment of possibility like none other that I have experienced in my life. So I'm very happy, I'm very hopeful. And at the same time, I realize that there's a lot of struggle ahead, and that we have to take seriously the fact that so many people are suffering and will continue to suffer if we don't develop a collective approach to transform our country and transform the world.
Well, thank you so much for putting in the work. And thank you so much for sharing these insights with me and our audience. Dr. Davis, it has been an honor to be able to moderate and have this conversation with you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much, Bethany, Alex, Sabina, Zainab, Aiden, Bree, and Shara for all of your important questions. Obviously, we're so proud of the work that our students do and the way that, you know, they put their human rights education at SMU into action. So we're glad we got to showcase a little bit of that during this event. Dr. Davis, before I ask you to share some closing thoughts, I wanted to share some ways that our audience can keep up with SMU Human Rights. Erica, do you mind sharing your screen? Thank you. So step one, support SMU Human Rights. We are currently undergoing an endowment campaign to ensure the future of human rights education at SMU. So that's where you can visit to learn more about how you can get involved and, you know, help ensure that this education is accessible to all future students who come to our campus. Second, keep in touch. We are on all the social medias except TikTok and Snapchat. We might consider that, but for now we're not on those. We're on everything else. And then there's our email address. And last but not least, hashtag demand dignity with us. That is our motto, our slogan, our living truth. And you can do that in your homes, in your communities, in your schools, in your workplaces, on your own social media, in your churches, and in every other space that you operate in. So those are some ways that you can continue to support us. And with that, I wanted to ask you, Dr. Davis, well, just to thank you, because we realize that you are someone who, one of the few living witnesses of an unfinished revolution, and the fact that you're here to share your insights about what we're seeing now is so special. So I wanted to ask if you had any closing thoughts for our audience tonight that they can take home with them.
Well, first, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to engage with so many of the students in the Human Rights Program. And let me say, I am totally impressed by the work that you're doing, that you have a Human Rights Program, that you can actually major in human rights, and you have a Human Rights Council, and that you have an Office of Social Change and Intercultural Engagement. I love that. And the one thing I didn't see, which I'm happy about, is your Office of Diversity and Inclusion, which is, you know, it's okay to have an Office of Diversity and Inclusion, but the fact that so many institutions jumped at the opportunity to create an Office of Diversity and Inclusion before they even asked themselves why it is that they need to call for diversity and inclusion. What about their institution has excluded people in the past? And I think that that's the place where we are now. We're asking in all kinds of institutions, educational institutions, healthcare institutions. We're talking about sports institutions, art institutions, are all asking how their institutions have been affected by structural and systemic racism. I'm so happy to have this opportunity to talk to you, because I truly believe that as an elder, as a person who's been around for some time, my future is contingent on my capacity to learn from those who are just starting out. And you've given me this marvelous opportunity to hear from wonderful students who are not only committed, but who are articulate and intelligent. And this is exactly what we need. This is our future. So once again, thank you so much for offering me this opportunity.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say. We're just, grateful beyond measure that you would take the time out of your demanding schedule, I'm sure, to speak with us and to share your insights with us. And I know that I've got lots of takeaways from my own life, and I'm sure all of our audience members do too. So, we wish you the best with everything that you've got coming up. And we're just honored to have virtually shared this room with you. So thank you so much. And thanks everyone for tuning in. Okay.